Welcome to EPG Padashala. I'm Dr. Ashita, Director, Center for Women Studies, St. Anne's College for Women, Hyderabad. Today we are going to discuss about the module Women's Magazines in Pre-Independent India in Women's History. Today I am going to focus on the role of women's magazine in changing the women's space both in private and public sphere in the pre-independent India. When we look at the history of women's magazine in India, there are three phases. The first phase, the reformist phase in the 19th century, and the second phase is radical critical phase in first half of the 20th century, during which most journals became platforms for wide-ranging and hard-hitting questioning of Indian society, of gender roles and spheres of activity, and also became vehicles of politicization. And the last phase, this is a period after independence when women's journals returned to domestic concerns. When we look at the international movement, there are a lot of newspapers and magazines published by the reformers during the 19th century, and these magazines and newspapers are considered as the vehicle of Indian nationalism, and they had a great role in spreading the Western education and ideas among the society during that particular period. So when we look at the history of the women's magazines in the 19th century, it's related to the social reform and religious movements. In the 19th century, there are a lot of Western educated people, and there were published many newspapers and magazines, and this period witnessed the emergence of new middle class intelligentsia. So this new intelligentsia, Western educated people, they realized that the Indian society, they recognized the problems of the Indian society in the form of its the superficial belief and the conservative thoughts. And this is very important when we look at the women's magazines in the pre-colonial period. We should look at the women's question in the social reform movements first. What is the status of women in the colonial India? This is when we look at the various social and religious practices related to women. It's female infanticide, child marriage, sati, and all showed the pathetic condition of women in the colonial India. And the women are then the female education is also, when we look at the in an educational level, the women are considered as an illiterate group in that particular period. When we look at the history of feminist movements in India, it's more related to the social reform movement. They focused on the problems of women in the Indian society, and these social reformers like Rajaram Mohan Roy and Ishwarchandra Vidyasagar, they all emphasis on the girls' education, and they fight for the abolishment of child marriage and sati, and they argued for the female rights of property and widow marriages. And the social reform movements protested against the polygamy. The 19th century witnessed the emergence of women associations by the Western educated women reformers. Sarnakumari Devi is a very important women social reformer in the 19th century. She formed Lady Association in 1886, and Pandita Ramabai started Sharada Sadan in 1892. Ramabai ran an open Hindu lady social and literary club in 1902 and Seva Sadan in 1909. And we can see the women's magazines edited by women around the period of First World War, and women then there are a lot of women magazines edited and published in vernacular languages such as Malayalam, Urdu, Telugu and Tamil also. And these women magazines focused on the women-centric issues. When we look at the content of these women magazines, and they focused on the women-centric issues, and they gave a space for women to share their feelings and views. And most of these magazines focused on the women's education, and they talked about the problems faced by the women in the society, and they tried to give a space for women to share their free feelings and views, and they asked the women to send their creative writing such as the poems, stories and articles, etc. And during this phase, the women magazines published articles, and they participated in the debates on the issues like age of consent, sati and widow remarriages. And they encouraged the women authors to publish their literary works such as articles, poems, stories, etc. And they conducted the essay competitions and distributed the prize to the readers to develop a reading culture among women. This is the most important contribution of women's magazines to the women is that they try to develop a reading culture among the women in the pre-independent society. So because they have published in the different languages, in both in English and vernacular languages also. So the women from the old class can access these ideas. This is the most important contribution by the women's magazines. They developed a reading culture among the women in the pre-independent India. And another thing, when we look at the content of these women's magazines, some of the articles deals household activities such as the importance of the cleanliness and how to nurture the children, and it's much more related to the domestic role of women. And it's another very important thing when we look at the women magazine and the political consciousness, because they had a great role in the development of nationalism among the women. And large number of women magazines are edited in the vernacular languages by the men and women from the different communities and castes during the freedom struggle of India, and they urged the women to enter into the freedom struggle. And these women magazines, they had a great role in developing the political consciousness among the women in the 19th century, because they have published a lot of articles, and which are written by the most important national figures like Gandhi, Nehru, Sarojini Naidu, etc. And they published the written form of the preaching of these nationalists also. And these magazines argued for the voting rights of women. Then these magazines insisted the women to throw the foreign goods and clothes and to use the Swadeshi products. So when we look at the magazines in the social reform movement, it's very important, because most of the social reformers took these magazines as a vehicle for spreading their nationalist ideas among the people. So when we look at these women's magazines, that is also came into the society with an aim to reforming women. That is more important part of this publication and edition of these women's magazines. So most of these the women's magazines editors are the prominent leaders of the nationalist leaders. So they try to propagate their nationalist ideas, and they try to spread the Swadeshi ideas among these women through their urging the women to throw the foreign goods, and they asking these women to enter into the nationalist movement and support the Swadeshi movement also. So so now we are going to analyze the different magazines published in the various vernacular languages. First, I am going to look at the Urdu magazines, the magazines which are published in the Urdu language. These Urdu magazines created a space for Muslim women as their voice could be heard. Mulaim-in-Nizwan was a pioneering journal in Urdu for women published from the 1880. Notable Urdu journals such as Tazibun Nizam, edited by Nishwan Sayyid Mumtaz Ali and his wife Muhammad Ali Begum, and Ishwat, edited by Rashidul Khairi by Rashidul Khairi. And they published articles on child care, health and hygiene, cooking, home management, religious thoughts, and recipes, discipline, travelogues, novels, poetry, biographies, along with reformist and educational information. And the other magazines, we are going to look at the Hindi magazines. These three Hindi women's magazines which exemplify the three phases in colonial period. The one is Grihalakshmi, that means Lakshmi of the house, and is edited by Gopaladevi, reforming women and to the domesticity. And the women magazines from the first phase focused on the role of education that make women into Sugrihinis, that means the perfect housewife. So this period focused on the domestic role of Indian women. There is another journal titled Stri Darpan, that means the mirror of women, edited by Rameshwari Nehru. She propagated the education, political awakening and fought against gender discrimination. This is very important because the Stri Darpan magazine, they focused on the gender discrimination in the society. Generally when we look at the magazines which are published during this period, they never focused on the gender discrimination in the family, in the society. Even though they focused on the women's education, but that also for the betterment family. This is the same view what they have shared with the social reformist. In Gandhian space also you can see so many women are entered, and Gandhi tried to bring the women and women into the national struggle by focusing on the traditional role of Indian women as motherhood. But this magazine, Rameshwari Nehru, she focused, or she tried to point out the gender discrimination also. And this Stri Darpan published the autobiographies of accomplished women to inspire the women. When we look at the history of the publication of women's magazine in the Hindi language, the journal called Calm represented the third phase. This journal encouraged the full participation of women into public sphere. It's the most important. They presented women as active subjects and empowered individuals in the Indian society, and they promoted civic and political consciousness for women and stimulated a critical attitude. These women magazines like Stri Darpan and Madhyada and Saraswati published the articles with the photographs of the schools to encourage the women to study. And next we are going to discuss about the women's magazines which are published in the Gujarati language during the 19th century. The Sri Bodh was the first women magazine published in India in 1857 in Gujarati language. This is emergence of the educated middle class men and the drive to modernize their wives paved the way to the publication of Gujarati magazine titled Sri Bodh. These magazines had sections on fiction, informative articles, especially related to science, history, geography, travelogues, poems, usually in the form of Garba songs and miscellany. And now we are going to look at the magazines published in the South India. First, we are going to look at the Tamil magazines. The Mother Marumanam, edited by Marakatvalli, a remarried widow. This magazine opposed the dowry and urged for the banishment of early marriages and the importance of the education for girls. These articles of these magazines revealed the pain and sufferings of the widow and argued for the widow remarriages. The special focus of these magazines was the widow remarriage. And the educated woman took initiation to publish the magazines in Malayalam, that is Sharada, Mahila, Muslim, Mahila Srimati for women. So we can see these magazines which are published in the Malayalam language, they distinguish the mainly and womanly spaces, and they argued for the education and girls' schools. And they when we let me to explain the women's magazines and their ideas in a critical perspective. This is the construction of gender. It's very important because these magazines never look at the gender roles in a family, and most of these magazines again they reinforce the traditional role of women, and they focused on the domesticity of women. So these magazines constructed a new women in India. These magazines constructed a new notion, that is a new women image among the Indian society, because they urge a woman to be ideal wives on the basis of Victorian ideals. Because now it is more different, because the Victorian woman is more obedient wife, and she is more domestic woman, and they focused on the private sphere than the public sphere. So these women were modernized but were still confined to domestic, and the prime duty was to make their husband happy. And the another point, when we look at the women magazines, they overemphasized the motherhood and insisted the women to be good wives. Because most of the times, when we look at the social reform movement, when they argued for the female education, again they focused on the motherhood. Once Gandhi said that a educated mother can only nurture a educated man. It can educated son. So it can be an educated mother can make an educated society. So this all focused on their domestic role. It's not, they never challenge or they never criticize the gender role in the society, especially in the family. And this women's magazines was published and edited by the women, provided a space for women to communicate and share their thoughts and emotions. When we look at the particular period, we can see that these magazines gave a space to women for sharing and sharing their emotions and thoughts, etc. And especially these women magazines published in the vernacular languages, they reformed the condition of women in colonial India. Women's magazines focused on various problems like that: female infanticide, child marriages, polygamy, parda system, and they argued for the importance of education among women. The women's education is more focused on the education on women. And it had a great role in creating awareness of nationalism among the women and urged the participation of women into the freedom struggle of India. And they dedicated the articles for political empowerment of women by urging the enfranchisement of the women and ask the readers to vote for women candidate. So this is also another contribution of, when we look at the contribution of women's magazines to the society, is that they published a lot of articles focused on the political empowerment, and they focused on the voting rights of women during that period, and they asked their readers to support the women candidates also. So this all strengthened the women's movements in India during that period. When we conclude the role of women's magazines in the 19th century, we can see the publication of women's journals started with the social reform movements in India. Actually, the first the women's journals published by the male social reformers during that period, and they focused the women's education, and they because they found that they recognized the subordination of women in the society in the form of some of the social and cultural practices, that is sati and dowry system and child marriages, etc. So when they published the magazines, they focused on these particular issues, but they never look at the women's subordination is related to their gender roles in the both in home and society. Then later these women edited women journals were published. So there also most of these women editors are social reformers, but they also continue they were also published the articles which are focused on which are focused on the matters related to the domestic role of women. But we could not neglect a very few journals published and they focused on this the gender construction also, because that is the best example is the Stree Darpan. When we look at the role of women's magazine in the 19th century India, it's more it started with the social reform movements in India. So when we look at this, the nature of the articles published in these magazines, it's more they focused on the women's education, because for the first time this women's journals were published by the male social reformers, and therefore they recognized the pathetic status of Indian women because of the practices of because of the prevalence of social and cultural practices such as sati and dowry system and child marriage and all. So they have written a lot of articles focused on these themes. Then later these women reformers published the women journals, and they also focused the same theme. Most of these magazines in the vernacular languages also focus the same theme, but at the same time we can see some of the magazines, like a journal in Gujarati, that is the Moon, it means Moon, it's encouraged the full participation of women into public sphere. So some of the magazines had a very different voice from the existed newspapers and magazines, and these magazines focused on the the gender roles also in the society. So when we we cannot, even though these magazines focused on the problems related to domestic role of women, and they urge the women to be the good wives and all, but at the same time we cannot ignore the fact that these magazines gave women during the 19th century a space for sharing the thoughts and express their views. And because most of these journals ask their readers to publish their articles, their poems and their stories and all, so we can conclude that these magazines gave a separate space or provide a space for women to communicate their ideas and ask them to show their feelings, and definitely these women's magazines had a great role in promoting the political consciousness among the women. Thank you.